It's my pleasure to be talking to Thomas Ricks. He reports on the U.S. military, or he's now a special military correspondent for the Washington Post since 2000. He is a Pulitzer Prize winner. His first book about the Iraq War was Fiasco, the American Military Adventure in Iraq. And he's just come out with The Gamble, covering the time period of what we know as is the surge. Thomas, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, the players involved in the surge aren't necessarily the ones that we would assume. Whose gamble was it?
I think it was a gamble for a variety of things. It was the U.S. military finally taking genuine risk as an institution and saying, okay, let's try something different. It was President Bush recognizing that he was on the path to defeat in Iraq and finally willing to genuinely roll the dice. It was a gamble with the lives of troops. We moved them out of safe, comfortable bases and out into very difficult circumstances to protect the Iraqi population. Unfortunately, it's a gamble that now President Obama has inherited and is going to find himself paying off a lot of bad bets.
What exactly was the surge? I mean, we know that it involved 20,000, 30,000 more troops, but it also involved payments to Sunni insurgents.
The most important aspect of the surge was neither one of those things, actually. Paying off the insurgents, more troops, yeah, those were important. But the key thing was giving American troops the mission of protecting the Iraqi population. Until then, the top priority had been transferring control over to Iraqi police and army. Petraeus and Odierno came in and said, no, this really isn't working. We've been rushing to failure. We've been over-optimistic. Let's go out and protect the population. So they moved the troops out, and it's a very tough time. People forget. February, March, April, May of 2007, every month, the U.S. death toll goes up with no signs of success. And a lot of people thought it's time to tell the president this isn't working. They stuck with it, and lieutenants and younger officers started seeing, hey, we're living out among the people. Things are getting different out here. We're getting more information. Once you started protecting people from intimidation, they would start working with you.
What I found most surprising after reading Fiasco, it was Ray Odierno who was the architect of this.
There's no question. Odierno was kind of one of the major villains of Fiasco. And to my surprise, as I worked on this book and went out to Iraq on these trips, Odierno was one of the heroes of this book. And it's funny, one day I put that to him. I was interviewing him in Baghdad, and I said, how do I get from the Odierno Fiasco to the guy I'm seeing now? Instrumental in turning this war around. Typical of Odierno, he folded his arms and said, your problem, not mine. My answer, 3 things. First, Odierno had a son in the army in Baghdad who was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. Fortunately, it didn't kill him. Unfortunately, it clipped his left arm and took it off. I think that is a transformative event for any parent to endure, especially one who's commanding in Iraq. The second thing is, after his Fiasco tour, the 4th Infantry Division, he goes back to Washington, has an interesting job. He becomes the U.S. military's ambassador to the State Department. And he learns a lot of the State Department and the National Security Council, where the levers of power are, how to make connections, who's the number 3 guy you really need to talk to in some office who really makes things happen. And so, when the third thing happens, he goes back out to Iraq, and he says, my God, we're losing this thing. And he's determined not to lose it on his watch. He knows who to call at the White House, at the State Department, to start making things happening. And he does an epic end run around the chain of command.
Now, who did he do the end around at that point?
His boss, General Casey, who was the top commander in Iraq. His boss's boss, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Peter Pace, who was opposed to the surge. His boss's boss's boss, the Secretary of Defense. And he went around all of them and went to the White House. And when the White House told people stop talking to Ray Odierno, they found other ways to communicate. And they put together the notion of the surge.
You say that it was a change in tactics to get out with the people. I mean, from George Bush's perspective, it seems to me that at least one of his objectives was, I just got to make sure that we have troops in there and that nobody's called this a failure.
There was a feeling that we were close enough to failure that the American public wanted to pull the plug on this. So yeah, the first aim was simply to find a way to get American people to support staying there. They didn't really like to talk much about how long it would take, because privately, the people who were putting this together thought it was going to take 18 to 24 months. Nobody would sign up for that, so they talked about sort of a 6-month surge. They really went into it thinking it was going to last much longer, and it did. Now, we can get to this, but when the surge ended, none of the basic problems facing Iraq had changed.